Hey there! In the following tutorial we're going to take a look at the basics of ActionScript programming using Flash CS6 and ActionScript 3. So let's do File New and create a new file. It's going to be an ActionScript 3 file. All the rest of the defaults are just fine, no problem. Now we could create our own button to use, but I really like using the component button. So if you go over to Window, Components, and you toggle down to User Interface, you'll find the button component right there, and just drag one out and put it kind of at the top of your file because you're going to need a lot of the space below. Now, one of the things that I really like about using the component is that it's got a lot of parameters that go with it. And by the way, if you are using CS5 or below, you'll find the component inspector actually has the parameters that you're looking for. But in CS6, the parameters have been moved over here to the properties panel. Anyway, these properties enable me to do things like check whether or not this is emphasized, whether it's currently selected, and even whether or not it's a toggle button. We can also give it a label, which we're going to do right now. I'm going to call it test button. And whoops, test button should have an open space before it, and then I hit enter, and there you can see test button above. Now if we test this button with control enter, so control test movie, or we can do test scene, it doesn't really matter, you'll see that we have the ability to click on that button and get some color. Now the question is, where is that color coming from? If you close that window, you can double click on the button, the component on your stage, and if you open it up, you'll see these are all the different variations of this button, this component. And if you really wanted to, you could double click and go inside of these and actually change the buttons if you wanted to, but I've never really found a reason to change them because what we actually have here is pretty good looking. So I'm just going to go back to the scene one. You can double click outside the button until you get back to the main scene, or you can just click on scene one at the very top. And before we go any further, I'd really like to save our file. So let's do save, and I'm calling this file basic events, and you can see I've already saved over it before. So we're going to be adding some code here. Now what we need to bring up is the actions panel. So if I go to window, actions, brings up F9, it does the same thing. This is the actions panel. Now just be aware that we're in the essentials workspace right now, and that's why that was hidden, because we don't always use it. But over on the right hand side is kind of a nice feature of actions, and that is the ability to use code snippets. Problem is that if you click on it, it comes up with it. Let's see, these are really nice. They've got a lot of different things here. We're going to use the basic event handlers and mouse click event, which is the most typical mouse event. So I'm going to double click on it, and you'll see, oh, it says it requires an object to be selected on the stage. So let's select our button. You come back to code snippets, click on that again, and double click on that click event, on that mouse mouse click event. Anyway, it comes up with a warning here. This dialog box is very important because it tells us that we need to name our object, and we need to give it an instance name that is actually using somewhat the same structure here. The first part is what's called camel case, and that's where we have lowercase first, and then any internal word is an uppercase letter. So we're going to call ours test button because that's what we named our button to begin with. Now this underscore suffix is a typical thing that we see, but we want to give it the underscore btn suffix because this indicates that this is a button object. For some coding, it's very, very important that you have the instance names because it actually will bring up code hinting for that type of object. Although we won't really see that in Flash CS6, I don't believe. We got to see that a little bit more in Flash CS5, and I'm not really sure why they disabled that feature by default, although you can set it up so that your files will have code hinting properly. Anyway, I'm going to hit OK because I have now given that button some a name. Now click in your actions panel so you can hide all that code being selected, and you'll see here is the code that we have generated. Now it's generated a whole bunch of comments along with some code which is either black or blue, and one that's a little kind of purple over there, and then a little bit more gray stuff, and then the green here which is a string, and then the blue that's a keyword, and then a little bit more gray because those are comments. We do not really need the comments for right now because we're going to be talking about all that stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and remove those comments, and remove those comments, and remove those, and I'll get that back to just one line each. Now, one of the things about this function event listener pair is understanding all the different parts, and that's what's really important. And the reason I don't really like to use snippets is because it writes all this code for you, and if you don't know what the code means, why do you know why to click on that? You don't really know how to fix anything, and that's what we're going to talk about right now, is what are all of these different pieces of code. The first part right here is the button that we're using. This is a reference to an object. That's followed by a dot, and that means that we're using dot syntax, which is very common in object-oriented programming. And that dot syntax means that that object is being followed by either a method, something that object does, or a property, some sort of characteristic of that button. You'll see this add event listener has kind of an action word to it, add. So that means that it's going to be a method. Now, properties and methods have arguments, and the arguments is, it says add event listener. Well, I need to know what's adding it and what to add. So the two parts here are the mouse event that says we're going to have a mouse event that we're listening for, and when that mouse event is triggered, we're going to go ahead and run that function or trigger that function. The next part down here is the function that we've defined, so that we know when we run this function what we should actually do. The name of the function is this one, FL mouse click handler, and that has to match the event listener in order for it to work, because those two have to match, otherwise it doesn't know what function it's talking about. The next part in here is a variable, actually, which is the type of event that is expected for this function. The next part says :void. That says should it send back any information and have that information saved in memory, and usually it's set to void, which means no. It says once you run this function, don't do anything else. Inside this function, and that's inside these curly brackets right here, it has some sort of action to take. In this case, it says trace mouse clicked, and that will trace something into the output window. Let's go ahead and save our file before we go any further, and we'll do control test movie, or you can even do test scene, it doesn't really matter. When we click on the button, we should be getting an output. Now the output right now is going into the output window, and if you remember at the beginning of all the tutorials, I always say let's go ahead and set up a digital media setup for our windows, and that includes putting the actions, output, and compiler errors, which is another window up here, compiler errors, all into one window. The reason why is because when I test this movie and I click on that button, you'll see the output comes into the same window as the actions, so it's not too difficult to get, or it's not difficult to find, and you don't lose your place very often. One last thing to do before we go forward is if you click on your object, you'll see that your action script disappears. The reason why is because when we created this action script, it actually created a new layer for us called actions. If you click on that actions layer or click on the first keyframe, you'll see that code will come back up. And if you look carefully, there's a little A right there, and that indicates that there's action script on that keyframe. And all the action script will go on keyframes in ActionScript 3.0. Anyway, one of the helpful things that we can do is pin this active script, and what that means is we can go ahead and click on any of the other things in our environment, any of the other tools, and it won't take us off that actions panel. And that's really nice. I'm going to go back to the black arrow, and we're going to save our work here and go on to the next tutorial.